Okay, so the Mets.
So the Mets.
What the fuck happened this weekend? Because I've said this before, like I'm a very casual Mets fan,
Uh-huh.
and I tuned in at least partly to all three of the games over the weekend. I
hmm
know Bradley watched all of them, I think,
hmm
and I'm sure you did as well. So how is it humanly possible that the Mets can have a comparable record to the Braves, be a really good team all year, and look like a terrible team when they are faced with actually locking down the division and not falling into the wild card? That is, I was astounded.
It's something you don't like to think. You like to, as a sports fan, as a rational human being, you like to think that something that happened 5, 10 years ago is not going to matter to something that happens today because it's a completely different set of players. It's a completely different manager. It's a completely different everything. It's like it's one franchise story, but the individuals involved in the story are independent of everything you've ever known and everything you've ever followed. And I'm 33 years old. I've been doing this for all those years as a Met fan. This year, 98 wins represents the most wins the Mets have ever had in a regular season in my entire life. It has never been better than this. And yet, this is the world we live in where the Mets, they they were hot and cold going into this series. Not everything was clicking. They had just split with the Marlins, which is kind of embarrassing in its own right. But they had a one-game lead. They had a lead in the season series. All they had to do really was win one game. Not just that, Emma. You have Jacob deGrom going on Friday. You have Max Scherzer, the guy you're paying $40+ million a year to pitch in these games, going on Saturday. And you have Chris Bassett, a human psychopath that for sure needs therapy, but in the meantime is a lockdown starting pitcher. And I
Yeah.
love him dearly for it. You have him going Sunday. And all three of them laid an egg. Every
I
single one of them. And then
I'm mad again.
yeah,
I'm
it's
upset
because
again.
it's how many ways, Bradley, do we want to break it down? It's like the pitchers were bad. They're by their standards, we should say. Like Jacob deGrom giving up 3 runs in 6 innings for a normal starting pitcher against a team like the Braves, you happily take that. But he's Jacob deGrom. He's the best pitcher in baseball. He shouldn't be doing this. And
Yeah.
then you add in the fact that, yeah, the Mets had something like 27 hits, but only 4 extra base hits. They couldn't get an extra base hit to save their life until Sunday when they hit 2 home runs. And all that happens is Bassett lays an egg, can't get out of the third inning. I,
Yeah. I
I,
guess, do you think it was DeGrom passive aggressively paying back the team for all of those years of no run support?
so I have a theory, Emma. I'm gonna I'm
Yeah.
gonna try it out on you. There are rumors out there that Jacob deGrom, if he doesn't sign with the Mets this offseason when he opts out, the only other team he'd consider is Atlanta. And he wanted to grease the wheels a little bit before going into this free agency to try to get more money for them. It's a theory I'm working on. I'm not 100% sure on it, but all I'm saying is I'm just saying it
Yeah.
wasn't. Quite frankly, the DeGrom game that makes me sick the most. This series this weekend, awful. Had a wonderful time, but there are 2 games that stick out like a thorn in my side going into this series. The first was the Jacob deGrom start in Oakland, in which he got embarrassed by a AAA lineup. Guys like Seth Brown and Junior Diaz are taking him deep. Those aren't made up names. Those are real players, I promise you.
Not creative players on
Yeah,
the show.
you're incredible. He gives up what I think was like 6 runs. He had walked 4 guys on the year going into that start. He walked 4 in that start. It's embarrassing. He shouldn't have done that against the A's. So that's one win. And the other one, it's the first game of the Marlins series. And I know that it's easy to pick apart the 2 most recent losses the Mets had before this Braves series. But those 2 losses, this is why the Mets are now 2 games back. This is how you end up in this hell that we are
Right.
living in. And it's just, I don't know. It's really hard. It is really hard trying to separate the abject failure that was this weekend from what is otherwise a super successful, enjoyable Mets season. But it's just like these last 3 games against the Nationals couldn't matter less. They don't mean anything. The Braves just have to win 1 game against the Marlins, who, by the way, aren't even going to start Sandy Alcantara in the series, your National League Cy Young winner. They just shut him down early for shits and gigs. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. So that's over. And now the Mets, the reason why winning the division was so important this new. I liked it until it now involves the Mets, the new playoff format, where the
Yeah.
Braves are going to get a first round bye, and then they're going to play the winner of the Cardinals and the Phillies. That sounds like a dream. You know why I know it sounds like a dream? Because I was dreaming about it all season and having really positive thoughts about that being the Mets' path. Now, the Mets are going to have to play the Padres in a 3-game series, one of 4 teams this year, by the way, that has won the season series against the Mets. So you got to win that 3-game series. Then you get a 5-game series with the Dodgers. Well, that sounds fun. And then if you happen to beat the Dodgers, you get a 7-game series with a team you've lost 6 of 7 against in the Braves. Oh,
Yeah.
and then by the way, if you beat the Braves, you probably have the Astros waiting for you.
Right.
Oh my! Sports are
No,
so fun.
it's just like a torture cycle. It's not even like not even like the Braves path is that much easier. It's just the fact of not having to play the Padres. To start off.
But it's also like it's the acceptance that at some point you're going to have to beat the Dodgers. Every National League fan understands whatever your path is to a World Series, it has to go through LA. You couldn't just put it off until the championship series when it's a 7-game series and it's more, you get DeGrom and Scherzer twice. You could have had that. Instead, not only are you going to have to get them in the National League Division Series, but you're going to have to use DeGrom and Scherzer against the Padres, which means Chris Bassett's the only guy that's going to go twice against the Dodgers. And I just saw this guy. He couldn't get out of the 3rd inning in Atlanta.
Greg, can I ask you something?
Oh, you can ask me everything.
So I was talking with my friend who's a Orioles fan, but he's a big baseball fan, and he was joking with me. He was like, "I feel like every time I've turned this game on or any of these games on, it's been the Mets going down in order." So I'm curious what you think about the offensive struggles and the bats going, tepid in a clutch moment, which has happened to us being, me and you and the team that we're both on, this has happened in so many clutch moments where the bats just go completely quiet regardless of who's in those uniforms. But specifically beyond that, what did you think of bringing up Francisco Alvarez for this moment? What did you think of bringing him up? And because honestly, as much as I was excited for it, he seemed completely unready for the moment.
He seemed like a 20-year-old, right? Like
he swung through a pitch and threw his bat.
So
he whiffed on it so bad he almost threw the bat into the crowd.
Francisco Alvarez has not had an at-bat yet in which he's taken the first pitch in his major league career. So I'm looking forward to that day. But Emma, it's funny. You and I, we talk Rangers so much. We've talked the last 3 years about 20-year-olds and what they need to do for a hockey team.
Right.
And for the most part, most of them seem at least ready and competent to be able to do it. Francisco Alvarez has to be the youngest 20-year-old I've ever seen in my life. And part of it, I feel bad because while I would have liked the Mets to call him up earlier, so his debut isn't this high voltage do or die series in Atlanta, he hurt his ankle at the end of August. So he missed 3 weeks. And before that, his introduction to AAA pitching, he wasn't hitting that well. He was hitting below 190 in his first couple weeks in AAA. He comes back from the ankle injury. He hits 350 with an OPS above 1,000. So he's clearly ready, but it's just like there was no middle ground where the Mets could have brought him up and had him play in Oakland before that. They couldn't bring him up to have him play in Miami.
Yeah.
You get unlucky with that one. So I write that off as unlucky. Mark Viento should have been the guy, and it's just like another kid who the scouting report on him apparently was just throw breaking balls. He'll swing at them. He can't hit them. And it's Pedro Serrano. That's all it is. The man sees a curveball. He panics. He doesn't know what to do. But I'm hoping he tells Joe Boo to fuck off in the playoffs, and he's able to do something there.
Right.
But Brad, to your first part, I didn't realize how much the Mets would miss Starling Marte until we got to this point in the season. He's been great all year. There's no denying that. I'm not trying to say that he hasn't been wonderful. He has earned the all-star selection that he got this year. But my God, it's not just him coming out of the lineup. It's just like when you're playing a catcher who might as well be a pitcher and batting him ninth, and you have to deal with the insertion of Darren Ruff, the defensive outfielder, let alone the black hole of a bat that he is. It's just like everything collapsed, and it's almost like the guys who'd been playing well started to put more pressure on themselves because they needed to make up for Marte. And you got at bats you didn't want to have to give out to the Ruffs and the McCanns of the world. And it's just like, I don't know. I know it sounds all doom and gloom. It's going to be just a slap in my face when the Mets sweep the Padres looking confident as hell going into a Dodgers series. And then I joke about it. It's like Met fans made a deal with the devil a couple of years ago. And we asked God to get Freddie Freeman and Trey Turner out of the National League East. And he's like, that's great. I'll do that. Oh, by the way.
I thought you were going to say, oh, wait, go on.
Well, he's like, I'm going to do that for you. But joke's on you. I'm putting them on the same team in LA that you're going to have to beat eventually.
Yeah, right. I mean, eventually things all come to pass, right? Like there's no good news without strings for the Mets, because the other thing is like, you would think that this kind of vibe or karma for the Mets would have dissipated with the Steve Cohen acquisition. Like Steve Cohen buying the team, you're like, all right, this is a new era, and you're able to pay some players. And this, I mean, he should be able to pay DeGrom next year. That's, I feel like, a bit. I'm not that concerned about that at that point. But I mean, they still have this organizational dysfunction despite this massive change in ownership.
And only the Mets would feel a sense of revitalization from a crotchety legacy wealth family changing hands to a literal financial criminal and being like, this is exactly what you need.
But he could do crimes on behalf of the Mets. That's what we need.
I'm all for money laundering if it's good for the Mets. Put me on record.
Like, here's the thing. I think Bernie Madoff is one of the worst human beings in the world, not just because he defrauded some people, but he made the Mets cheaper. And that really ruined my life.
So bad.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, it's like the new era with Steve Cohen is more obvious this year than ever because, again, 33 years. Oh, someone's at my door. I'm not getting it. 33 years that the Mets have been a part of my life. This is the winningest season we've ever had. That's step one. And then the way that I can't even, you can call it a Mets collapse. The point I've hated most the last 3 days I've seen is, hey, did you know on June 1st, the Mets had a 10.5 game lead on the 23 and 27 Atlanta Braves? The Atlanta Braves played 114 win baseball since June 1st. The Mets played 100 win baseball since June 1st. At some point, it's you're Robin Williams and Goodwill Hunting, and you are saying it's not your fault. Like, how the hell does a baseball team play a 114 win pace for 4 months? That's the only team that does that is the Dodgers, and here we are.
What the Mets should have been able to do is steal one. They should have been able to steal one. Given
it wouldn't have even been a steal. That's the thing that crushes my soul. Wouldn't have even been a steal. You have DeGrom against Fried. That's an even pitching matchup. The Mets should have an advantage of. You have Scherzer against Kyle Wright. That is a heavy Met advantage in the pitching matchup. And then you have Chris Bassett against Charlie Morton. That is a heavy Met advantage in the pitching matchup, where I know the Mets should have scored more runs, but one of those pitchers should have been able to win with 3. And it was really frustrating that just Dansby Swanson and Matt Olson are literal fire emojis. And
that's the thing is I anticipated that the DeGrom start was going to be so low scoring and they were going to fail him in the 7th and 8th and 9th inning once again. But the fact that it was kind of the same story with Scherzer and with Bassett, and how there just wasn't it wasn't the same. They did not play defensively in the way that you have grown accustomed to the Mets playing defensively.
The crazy thing, though, is in the DeGrom start and the Scherzer start specifically, they were self-inflicted wounds by the pitchers. Sure, they both gave up 2 home runs. Like, doesn't matter who your defensive outfield is if you're letting the ball go over the fence. And with DeGrom, it's so jarring because it's been the one thing that for some reason has troubled him all year. He always seems to get haunted by a long ball. Even in his spectacular start back in August against the Braves, his last batter faced Dansby Swanson, took him deep for a 2-run homer. And then in Oakland, he gave up, I think, 2 home runs. Now, there was some other shenanigans happening in Oakland, like Jeff McNeil discovering Newton's law all of a sudden and gravity really coming into play there. But it's just like, with the Scherzer start frustrated me because the Mets scored first. He gives up a solo home run to tie it up to Swanson. The Mets score again. He gives up back-to-back home runs, including a just moonshot by Matt Olson. So it's like, should the Mets have scored more runs for their pitchers? Yeah, but when your ace is giving up bombs to guys in a lineup as good as the Braves, it's demoralizing. Like, they are at some point human to be like, oh my God, like, what else do we have to do? If our ace is going to get banged around like this, how much more do I need to do? And then you start putting pressure on yourself. And again, you have a literal man-child in your lineup who is just like, see baseball, hit baseball, except he can't hit baseball right now. It's God. You and I had been talking for a week coming up to this interview, and I was like, I need you to understand that there's a scenario on Monday where it is the worst moment of my life, and you need to at least appreciate this as a possibility before you bring me on. And you, being a good friend, said, well, I don't think that's going to happen, but if it does, the content will be phenomenal. And
yes.
Here we are.
And here we are with the content.
The Darren Rebellion quadrant. What am I trying to say? Conundrum of being like,
oh yeah,
this is bad for the country, but it's tremendous content.
Oh God,
it's bad for Mets fans, but it is tremendous content. Before we get to hockey, I just want to provide one stat of another ex-Met torturing the Mets.
Yeah.
In the vein of Justin Turner and in the vein of Daniel Murphy. Travis Darnow, former starting catcher for the New York Mets, is now hitting .333, 25 for 75, with 7 doubles, 4 homers, and 20 runs batted into the 22 games he's played against the Mets since they released him in 2019, per Mark Bowman, Braves beat writer for MLB.com.
And why did the Mets release Travis Darnow? It wasn't because he was struggling. It's because had the Mets kept him on the roster, the Wilpons kept him on the roster for one more day, his $3.4 million salary would have become guaranteed, and they didn't want to pay him. So they simply released him. They're still paying
for the Wilpons.
That's the only reason Travis Darnow was released by the Mets. Would Travis Darnow
thrifty.
Would he still be a Met now? Probably not. Let's be realistic here. But the reason why Darnow is not or was not a Met the season they released him is because there was a $3 million price tag that had to come pay, and the Wilpons did not have the money.